the financial services market is under so much pressure given the intense competition from fintech firms across the globe. But the COVID-19 pandemic disruptions appears to have added to this pressure among the key sectors. Now, latest reports from professional services firm PwC shows that global fintech investments, which stood at $100 billion as of 2018, is estimated to have shrunk to around $6 billion as at the first quarter of 2020. Now, Nigeria is home to some of the 400 tech hubs in Africa, and together with the chief executive of Precise Financial Systems, Dr. Yele Okeremi, who's here with us in the studio, will be analyzing the disruptions in the space as well as the need for actions from regulators. Good morning, Dr. Okeremi. Thanks for coming on the program.
Pleasure, busy, as always.
So since the outbreak of the COVID-19, of course, tell us just how much of disruptions has been brought to the financial technology space.
You know, the thing is that the COVID-19 situation is something that's absolutely unprecedented, at least for many of us who are alive, because I was told, history tells us that something like this happened around about 102 years ago, so not very many people have seen it. And so when we have such situations, it's impossible to plan for everything. So our lives have changed, and indeed, perhaps almost permanently, we have had complete shutdowns, so to speak, even backed up by the states, where we said, do not go out. And so what's the implication of this? Quite a number of things that we used to do on a one-on-one basis or on a contact basis have become permanently disrupted. And of course, this also has very major implications on businesses. Now, some businesses are really in big trouble today because if you are in aviation, travel, logistics and stuff like that, really serious issues. We don't have many parties, not much of entertainment. But let's come to finance, because all these things affect finances as well. If you just follow the money. So if you speak about the GDP and it's about money flows. So these things have happened already. But if you observe what happened when the lockdown was lifted in Lagos last week, Monday, you observe that so many people went to the banks on that Monday, and it became very chaotic, as it were. Now, that shows something. It tells us something, that, yes, people were not adequately prepared, but how well can you even prepare? It lets you understand that quite a lot of us still need to have personal contacts to be able to transact businesses financially. This hasn't, we are not, nobody is 100% prepared for these things. And so to that extent, you can see that this COVID-19, I would say is a very, very major game changer. So even for service providers, so if you take a look at the number of service providers, including my own company, we had to send out statements to our counterparties to let them know, okay, we would support you remotely. So for clients who are fairly sophisticated, where they can grant you remote access, you might be able to do work like that. But like I said, on Monday last week, you could see that a lot of us in Nigeria, when you look at the structure of the social structure in Nigeria, well, socio-economic structure, you realize that quite a lot of people are not as sophisticated as those that the FinTechs or the financial institutions would like to say, oh, you can work from home. And I had conversations with some friends of mine who work in very interesting multinational banks and who tell me stories. Oh, my bank in France, they've been shut down for, my branch in France has been shut down for weeks, and nobody even wants to go back to work. But look at what happened in Lagos. And the truth of the matter is that this is going to continue. And of course, I mean, that also speaks to even the number of people who are financially excluded. So these are all situations that we see with COVID-19. And I would say that COVID-19 is a warning shot, because who knows, things like this may happen. May not necessarily, we do not pray to see things of this gravity anymore, but the truth is that there might be disruptions, and we need to really, really, you know, I would say change our game so that we can ensure that at least there's minimal disruption, although there will be some, but let's make it minimal.
Talking about changing our game now, are there opportunities that players can leverage at this point, especially for those who are operating at the retail lending segment?
See, the issues about retail lending, I would say, yes, there are. So when you have things like this, I always say this to people, challenges bring down hegemonies, and they bring up hegemonies. That's the way life is. So quite a number of incumbents who have been practicing their business in certain ways would want it to continue that way, but this is out of their control. They can no longer control that. And so it's going to have negative impacts on them. But then you have challengers who have been trying to do new things. And so those challengers have major opportunities to do things. But talking about the lending space, the issues about lending space is that, yes, we've seen FinTech being applied in lending where you could virtually apply for loans using a USSD code or, fill a form online and then within minutes, your account is credited. So that's not a problem. The technology exists to achieve this. And I would say the technology is available to people who are smart enough and who can see it. But the issue is, to what end are you applying the technology? When we talk about retail lending, why do we do retail lending? There are only two reasons why we want to borrow or lend, as it may be, on the other side. You are borrowing either for consumption or for investments. Now, if you are borrowing for investments, very good, indeed, because you are looking forward to be able to pay back from the returns on the investments. And so you will expect that once your return on investment is higher than the interest rate, then the business is technically viable, at least when you now do a capital mix, which includes your own capital plus borrowed funds, okay? But when you borrow to consume, then there's a bit of a challenge. And because particularly you now borrow to consume and you are not producing anything, then there will be issues. So what I'm driving at here is that the issue may not really be the technology. The issue may be what we will see after in terms of having a lot of possible bad loans because people have borrowed monies that they may not be able to repay back as a result of this situation.
With all of this now, where do you see COVID-19 taking investments in FinTechs in the near future, of course, looking at these disruptions?
Well, so investments will always continue, and that's the honest truth. So it depends on what type of investor you are. So some people invest when the market is bullish, and some people invest when the market is bearish. Depends on who you are. All right? But I say that actually common sense would say do things when it looks like it's rising. But I always say this all the time. Common sense only gives you common solutions. But if you really want unprecedented solutions, then you need to think a little bit differently. And you need to look at the markets, particularly when it's down, and you look for fundamentals. And I'll explain what I mean by fundamentals. So I'm looking at businesses that have actual capacity to create value. So if you see the business has actual capacity to create value, particularly at times like this, there are possibilities of disruptive solutions. So at such times, it's a good time to invest. However, you would see, generally speaking, if you do a line of best fit, that the investment flows, just like you said, we have about 90-something% drop in the value. Of course, we understand how markets are driven. Markets are driven by nothing other than fear and greed. It's not about intrinsic value. But for those who are really interested in intrinsic value, it might not be a bad time to invest at all in smart companies that are likely going to do disruptive things.
So isn't this a better time to further promote financial inclusion?
Well, it's a good time it's always a good time to promote financial inclusion. But I have said this, and I think I've said it on this platform before. Financial inclusion is necessary and good, and that's what the central bank governor would like. Every central bank governor wants to be able to control the levers for its monetary policies. But you see, there's a prerequisite to financial inclusion. And I say that prerequisite is financial empowerment. Because if you take a look at people who live from hand to mouth, they're just conduits. How do you want to financially include them? Because there's a cost of even getting a bank account opened. So to speak, there's a cost of maintaining a bank account. A number of people at the bottom of the pyramid may not even be able to afford these costs. So I think it's necessary, yes. We are very concerned about financial inclusion because, of course, like I said, the central bank governor wants to be able to control the markets. But I think fiscal policies need to take a look And we need to have a national policy that actually creates value, that actually guarantees that a lot of Nigerians can create wealth. When we have Nigerians that can create wealth, I will tell you that financial inclusion, going by the effort we have today, will fall in without any conversations at all.
Now, talking about fiscal policies now, which you just mentioned, now with COVID-19 disruptions at this point now, how urgent is the need for regulations in this sector to curtail capital flight and upscale corporate governance?
Well, you see, the issues about regulations are very interesting. So regulations would want certain things to happen by fiat, and then you say, if they don't happen, then we will do this. However, the laws of nature will always prevail. If you try to circumvent the laws of nature, what you are going to see is going to be something called the black market, so to speak. So regulations are important, but I think that much more than regulations, what we require are stimulations that guarantee that we can create an environment that allows money to flow. Like I said all the time, I mean, I have investments myself. Money is like water. It will always flow to the lowest level. It will find its level. Now you can try to disrupt it by creating barriers here and there, but I tell you one thing, it's only a matter of time. It will still find a means of flowing. So what I think we really need to do, regulation is necessary and is good. Please don't misquote me or don't misunderstand. But I think what is much more important to me today in Nigeria and in Black Africa, I say, is how do we do things that guarantee that people are empowered to create value. Now, if we do that to create several opportunities for people to create value, you will see that the kind of regulations that you require are going to be a lot softer. Take a look at what happened in the United States, for example. Well, when Donald Trump came into office, part of the things he did was to say, oh, there are too many regulations. Let's even break down barriers. And that's reasonably true. Because what regulations do, or regulators do, I mean, it's like a football match. Regulators are like referees. But which country do you think would want to go out into a football tournament to win and hire a referee to lead? No country does that. No team does that. What they would hire are coaches. And so I would say at this particular point in time, because what coaches do is teach, empower, stimulate, and do everything to help the team win. I think what we need much more than regulations now is stimulation.
Now, let's talk about other low-hanging fruits in the markets. Now, there's been this controversy about charges for USSD sessions between banks and the telcos. Of course, financial institutions are not interested in taking the bills as well as the telcos. So why is it difficult to actually reach a truce on the matter?
It's a very interesting one. You know why? Because while the banks, when you speak to both parties, you would see that they both have, logic in the arguments. So the telcos say, hang on, we've put investments on the table to create the possibilities of using this thing we call USSD. And because we've put in investments, we are not social enterprises. We put in the investments because we want to make money out of it. All right? Now, the banks want to leverage on that. And they say to the customers that you don't have to pay for it. Now, that's a bit of a challenge. So if you see it from the standpoint of the telcos do have a point. If you want to use their services, then somebody has to be able to pay for it. So the issues, and we've seen this in a number of other issues, when the intermediary, at the end of the day, says, I'm passing the cost to the user. So that's a little bit of a difficult thing for the banks to want to do. Are they going to try to pass the cost to the user? Because already they feel the financial services are not so cheap. So that's why we are having this conversation. But I think that there are ways that this can happen. And my first tab at this is that perhaps the same way a number of us have broadband. Some of us buy unlimited broadband, and it doesn't matter what you do. You just consume it, and at the end of the month, you renew it. Perhaps this kind of conversations can happen between the banks and the telcos on behalf of the customers. I think that might be a smart way arranging these trips.
Because I was going to say that isn't it the best time for all the stakeholders involved to actually come together and come to a logical conclusion, especially as we aim to decongest, the inflows of customers into the banks at this time?
That's correct. You see, being in business is very interesting. It depends on what your business strategy is. And without any fear of equivocation, most businessmen would prefer to deal with people at the top of the pyramid. They pay more, they give you less stress. Their businesses are more straightforward. But when you are in the mass market space, it's a different ballgame. They're going to ask you for a lot more, they're going to challenge you a lot more, and then the margins are a lot thinner. And that's why some of these conversations they're business decisions. I do a transaction, a wholesale transaction as a bank, and I make fees, legitimate fees, in the hundreds of millions. I'm happy with that. Rather than having 3,000 people who are just giving me stress and they're just giving me pennies. So those are conversations that need to take place, and you cannot blame anybody for taking business decisions. These are business decisions, except there's a higher force that comes in to compel them to do certain things.
Many thanks, Dr. Yele Okeremi, Chief Executive of Precise Financial Systems, for coming on the program.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.